Okay, and let me start the presentation. Okay, so just as standard rules and standard procedures, there are not a lot of meeting rooms today because we're obviously all virtual, but if we could keep our own individual sites muted, that'd be great to reduce noise. Everyone just raise your hands if you have any questions, state your name before speaking for recording purposes, and everyone's names are visible, so I don't think that's an issue. So next slide. So we're going to move on to the agenda. So we're going to start with a presentation on the community air monitoring results, which will include some great story maps that our wonderful folks in Air Resources have made for us. And also with and next we'll have a presentation on the Extreme Heat Action Plan with Leo Bockinger and Mark Laurie, mostly Leo. And then after that, we can discuss what our next steps are. And there'll be an opportunity for Climate Justice Working Group members to ask questions during that time period. Are there any questions before I move forward? And just double checking, everyone, we can all see my screen, correct? All
Yes.
right, fantastic. Okay, so I am going to pass things over to Margaret, and we'll start the presentation on the Community Air Monitoring Initiative results. Margaret, please take it
All
away.
right. Thanks, Alana. Um, so today we're going to discuss the overall findings of the initiative and the phase 1 report to the communities, which features story maps with mapping tools to help us and the communities understand the results, evaluate sources, and develop emission reduction strategies. This is the 4th time that we've met with the Climate Justice Working Group on this program, and we are excited to be with you again to cover the results of the study. I think the last time we convened was near the kickoff of the study, soon right after that. So let's get into the next slide. Oh, and I actually already did that one, so we'll go on to the one after that. Thanks. So just a quick overview. As you know, the Climate Act required us to monitor air quality in 4 disadvantaged communities, and Governor Hochul expanded that to 10 to provide a more comprehensive look at air burdens in disadvantaged communities. Mobile monitoring was conducted for 1 year in each community using vehicles equipped with sensor technology, which measures and tracks greenhouse gases and other pollutants. The results of this effort can inform investments to reduce emissions and exposure to air pollution in disadvantaged communities. Next slide. So, as required by the Climate Act, DEC is using this data to identify air pollution burdens and the local sources contributing to air pollution, especially near locations of sensitive populations like schools, childcare facilities, and nursing homes. We'll work with the communities to gather input on their air quality priority areas and develop emission reductions strategies. And we'll assess existing measures and responsible entities to reduce emissions and implement exposure reduction strategies. Next slide. So mobile monitoring provides short-term sensor measurements for many of the pollutants over a large area. Sensors are not regulatory monitors. The results represent a local screening level of sensor data to show higher and lower air pollution levels across a community to help identify sources. Next slide. So our contractor Aclima drove their low emission vehicles on public roads at least 20 times across all days of the week and times of the day for 1 year. This was to identify sources contributing to elevated concentrations, and our DEC staff evaluated those mobile monitoring results, other air monitoring results, DEC network or community studies, emissions information from permitted sources, and the community input. The map on the right is an example of one of the Aclima maps showing annual pollutant levels for the Bronx. In the Bronx, the study area covers about 63% of the area, and it includes a higher number of a high number of air pollution sources, including traffic, which is known as a major source of air pollution, disproportionately burdening or impacting the area. The pollutant measured here is fine particulate matter, measuring 2.5 microns and smaller, and the yellow road segments show higher levels. I'm sorry, is that right? Yeah, the no, we switched it. So the darker blue shows the higher levels measured along the major expressways, and you can see some of the major expressways like the Cross Bronx Expressway show up here. Next slide. So this slide shows the target pollutants and expected sources of pollution, including greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide and methane. PM2.5 mostly comes from combustion sources using petroleum-based fossil fuels to heat buildings, generate electricity, and run motor vehicles. Other sources include industrial processes, commercial cooking, and burning wood. Methane is measured to identify releases from landfills and sewage treatment, and ethane is measured with methane to identify natural gas leaks. Next. So just to clarify the use of the monitoring results, mobile monitoring, it primarily measures traffic pollution because it's collecting data in the road as the cars drive. It potentially captures pollutants from nearby stationary sources. And it's beneficial to this project because many people living in DACs live closer to roads and air pollution sources. But we are using sensors here with this mobile monitoring, and that's because they're lower cost, they're portable, but they require calibration and correction. Their performance can be affected by temperature, humidity, and other pollutants. EPA recommends the best use of results from sensors is non-regulatory and it's supplemental information. And the sensor data should not be compared to health-based air quality standards or to evaluate somebody's health risk. So EPA has not defined health-based standards for these very short time periods like what we've measured here, and more research is needed to understand the health effects associated with short-term peak concentrations and how health risks should be communicated. Next slide. So DEC efforts to provide the communities with exploratory maps and tools helps us expand the conversation about air quality and work collaboratively with the communities to get their input about air quality concerns and validate some of the findings. Next slide. So ACLIMA modeled annual average air pollutant levels for every 100 meters of road, which is about 330 feet across the study areas. But DEC incorporated those results into our online interactive maps, along with other data visualizations showing higher pollutant levels using the 1-second data to identify sources. So our CAM science team has developed various methods to identify areas of higher pollutant concentrations. The image on the right is an example of the mapping tools found in the story maps. It shows areas of higher pollutant levels or focus spots for nitrogen dioxide and black carbon, which are indicators of traffic pollution, typically diesel vehicles, near sensitive receptors of locations of vulnerable populations for exposure to air pollution. Schools, childcare facilities, public housing, nursing homes, and mobile and stationary sources. DEC is providing these tools to provide more context to help communities identify sources and develop air pollution reduction strategies. Next. So overall findings, the findings validate some of the community's concerns we heard during the community meetings. The community air monitoring results are consistent with other studies that have shown that mobile monitoring with sensors are useful screening tools to provide insights about local sources and pollution levels across a community. In general, higher pollution levels were found along and near roads with high traffic congestion, bus and diesel truck traffic, construction, busy commercial retail activity, and near industrial zones, waste transfer stations, rail yards, scrap metal processors, vehicle dismantlers, auto body repair shops, asphalt plants, ports, petroleum storage, warehouses, and landfills. Diesel vehicles operating in and traveling to these areas are contributing to these higher pollution levels. And next slide. So these are high-level summaries illustrating different examples. In each one of the story maps, we have examples of specific results for each community. Many roadways, important source categories, and neighborhoods of interest have been identified. Next. So our DEC science team is going to develop the community reports in 2 phases. Both phases will be presented in online interactive story maps. So phase 1, starting in September, DEC will hold in-person meetings to discuss the results using the story maps during information sessions and presentations. Then the most critical work begins with the communities to identify and prioritize areas of concern and sources for emissions reduction strategies. We'll work with other state agencies, city and local governments, and other relevant stakeholders to be part of this process and work across intersecting issues. DEC doesn't regulate all sources likely to be identified by this effort, and some problems like land use will require solutions beyond the scope of this community air monitoring. So this fall and winter, the community advisory committees will meet to prioritize their air quality concerns and develop air pollution reductions goals. The committees will come together as one group to collaborate with DEC, the Climate Justice Working Group, and other entities to work on possible strategies to meet the emission reduction goals. DEC's second phase of reporting will include the prioritized recommendations to mitigate air pollution and the entities with the authority to implement actions. This report may also include areas for follow-up activities such as additional monitoring, facility inspections, and regulatory or permitting actions. So next, I am going to introduce Dr. Joe Marto. Joe is going to walk us through our story maps. Thanks.
Thank you, Margaret. And actually, if you could pull the slides back up, there was one more slide that I start on. All right, regardless, I guess I will take control of the screen then. So today I'm going to lead everyone through just a quick little introduction to the story maps themselves. But before we dive into there, I just wanted to guide everyone to the Community Air Monitoring Initiative webpage. This is on the DEC website, and this is kind of where we're hosting a whole bunch of information. And so right now you can see that we have the story maps. We have 2 videos so far, one that's about community air monitoring, and then another one that's a tutorial for the story map tool. I want to highlight though, for our outreach, we have a whole bunch of in-person meetings coming up, many of which are scheduled going into September and October. So these can be found here. Additionally, we have office hours that are ongoing right now. So we are making ourselves as DEC scientists available if people have any questions about the air monitoring initiative or the tools that we've developed. And then I also want to highlight as well that we have a whole bunch of different fact sheets on this page as well, because there's a lot of information that has gone into this initiative. But I'm going to scroll back up and show you a little bit into the story maps right now. So basically, what we decided for this initiative is that we wanted to develop a way that people can look at the data and interact with it that's more interactive than just a PDF report. You know, we know that people are going to be really interested in what's happening in their communities and want to explore the data itself. So we wanted to create a tool to make that available. And so we have this whole series of story maps. There are 15 of them total. One for the overview of the project, 10 different story maps for each of the 10 study area communities, then 4 story maps for our different methods, peaks analysis, which looks at the highest concentrations for the pollutants, our focus spot tool, which Margaret talked a little bit about, which is a statistical tool to look at areas with persistent higher elevations or higher concentrations of pollutants. We created a mobile source indicator to try to identify areas that have a higher likelihood of diesel or non-diesel air pollution. The air pollutant levels, the annual pollutant levels is Aklima's model product. So that is developed from a machine learning algorithm. All 4 of these method story maps have a lot more information about what actually went into these different tools. And then lastly, at the end, I'm going to show our community air monitoring mapping tool, which basically allows people to explore the data at their own leisure. So you can put on different layers or explore in more detail to see exactly what's happening within the communities. And our hope is that with these, people can go in on their own and also go in with us and start to identify some sources or find areas that could have air pollution interventions. I'm going to start though with the overview. So all of our story maps kind of work the same way, wherein we have a whole bunch of jump links at the top here with different descriptive headings. You know, we give an introduction to the project, what was done, why it was done, all of that. Talk about the different communities. And we're going to go through just really quickly give an overview about some of this stuff. So what is mobile monitoring? Again, we have this link to the video. And then how to use these story maps. So again, there's a lot of information here, and we know that people aren't necessarily going to go through it like they would read a book. So people might jump around, and we wanted to make sure that, you know, that information can be found where you're looking for it and that it will make sense. But this is a great place to start if you want to see, you know, what the different story maps hold and kind of get your bearings for this whole tool. And then we've also talked at length about the fact that this is sensor data. It's not regulatory monitoring data, so there are caveats that go along with that. Um, so that's one thing that we discuss. And then we also have some overall findings. Oh, and I would hope that this video would load. But just some overall findings about the project as a whole. Oh, there we go. Now it comes in. And then some next steps, which we've talked about how this is our phase 1 report, and phase 2 is going to focus more about interventions and emission reduction strategies in action. So as I said previously, though, we have 10 different story maps, one for each of our communities. I'm just going to jump into one of them right now. And similarly, we have a whole bunch of headings in here. So we have a community profile, which gives our kind of background about the history of the community. What is industry like there? You know, what's the makeup of the community as well? Historical redlining, air pollution sources, some results, community survey, and next step. So, you know, this is the same sort of thing for each community. We wanted to give a little character to these. So we added in videos and pictures, a lot of historical pictures as well, to show what's happening within these communities. And if you're interested in any of them, they each have their citation. You can see what's going on in each one of those. Historical redlining, it's a very important concept, and part of the DAC criteria was redlining. So the first maps that we show when this loads in just a second is our historical redlining map. All of the maps across this platform are interactive, so you can, you know, pan and zoom, make full screen, etc. Moving down, we talk about some air pollution sources, stationary and mobile sources within the community, and then we also talk about some community involvement and, you know, previous community concerns and some studies that have possibly happened within those communities. And then we get into the results. So we wanted to show some of the results, but we know that we can't really be exhaustive for everything because this is a very large study that, you know, gets to a really fine scale. It goes street by street, block by block. So we kind of did a little bit of a best hits within the community to show some of the things that we've seen when we've been looking at the data. So we do this little bit of a tour which you know, allows you to see some of the results, but then we also link to the community air monitoring mapping tool where you can actually explore this in more detail. And with this tour, all of this is interactive, so you can change what data is being displayed. And likewise, a lot of these layers have additional information if you click on them. So for example, every single focus spot on this map is going to tell you what pollutant it is, what are the concentrations that we're looking at, how big of an elevation it is. Similar thing for all of our peaks. You know, you can click on any single one of our black carbon peaks and get a bunch of information. So there's a lot that went behind these tools here. And as I said, this is a tour, so it jumps around to different communities, different areas. Some of the other layers that we included were sensitive receptors. So we have the different categories here: schools, public housing, childcare facilities, healthcare, residential healthcare, playgrounds, and libraries. And then we also have a whole bunch of permitted sources categories as well. And again, any of these can be clicked on to see what is the information behind that data layer. So just jumping on a little bit further, after the tour, one thing that we want to highlight is a community survey. So we developed a survey that's specific for this project, trying to identify what are some of the concerns within the communities. So we wanted to highlight that this is, you know, not for life-threatening, dangerous pollution. This is to try to identify things that might be related to this project where interventions might be applicable. And we've already gotten some feedback from that. Survey is going to be open until the end of this year. So that's just another aspect, another way that we're trying to solicit feedback beyond our office hours and our open email and going around into the community again. So finishing out, we have the next steps. And then I really quickly also want to show some of the capabilities within the air monitoring tool. So with that, it starts off, I want to highlight this About button. This gives a lot of information for the tool itself. We have links to all of the fact sheets as well, and then additional information for all of the layers. So this is where we additionally have citations for the layers too. Most of these were made in-house, but some of them are not necessarily. So if you're interested in knowing more information, there's a lot to discover here. How to use this tool is a brief little tutorial, but I'm going to run through some of this right now. And then you can click on any one of the communities and you get dropped into this map. If you ever get lost, this button on the top right brings you back to the same About. And so with that, you know, it starts off with just the CAM study area, but we have every single layer available here to turn on. So, you know, you can zoom in and see specifically what's happening within your communities. We have a legend tab over here that's going to update depending on which layers you are actually viewing at a time. We have filters, so these allow for sensitive receptors, sources, and peaks. You can select only a few of those if you want. So for example, if you're interested in, let's say, schools and playgrounds, maybe you're only interested in automotive manufacturer and, let's say, manufacturing and production facilities, and maybe you're only interested in methane and ethane peaks. You can clean up the map really quickly, just to show the things that you're really looking at, and you know, use this to create, say, screenshots that are trying to tell a different story. And just like with the maps before, you know, you can click on any of these layers to get additional information. So one thing that I really like with the peaks is, for example, we have these Google Street View links, which drops you right to that location. And this example I've checked out before. You can see that there's this gas pipeline infrastructure right next to where there was peaks for both ethane and methane, which is indicative of a natural gas leak. So you can see what days specifically that occurred, you know, what were the concentrations that were found here, and things like that. Then really quickly going through some of the other layers. So I'm going to turn these off. We have all of our focus spots, which, as I said, you know, you can dive into the focus spot story map to see exactly what that means, but you can turn on one or more of these. We also have the annual pollutant levels. So these are the model data, and this covers the entire study areas. You can choose which pollutant you want to look at. So it defaults to PM 2.5, but let's say you turn on black carbon, NO2. And with this, you know, again, there's a whole bunch more contextual information to look at in here. So you can see what's the concentration, how many times this road segment was driven, things like that. And then our diesel and non-diesel mobile sources. So these are index tools. If I go over to the legend, it's telling you the color on the roads is telling you how many trucks pass by in a given day. And then our indicator tool is giving you the likelihood of the air quality impacts from that. So with that, I'm going to take a break and pass it back off to Adriana, who's going to talk a little bit more about the community involvement.
Dr. Mardo, for that amazing overview. I know that there's so much more there, and that was a really quick overview, but I would encourage everyone to take some time to poke around. If we could bring the slides back up, please. And I think there's a QR code that we missed, so if we can maybe start on slide 18, please.
Nope, that's not it.
Yep, and I will
Sorry,
add really quickly that the story maps went live last week, so people have been checking them out. And yeah, when the QR code comes up, you can scan that with your code. It works across all different devices, computers, tablets, and phones, so that's available right now.
Okay, can everyone see that?
Yes.
All right, are we on 18? Okay, can everyone see this? We're good?
Yes, this is
All
good.
right.
So folks can use this QR code if they want to go straight to the story maps that Dr. Mardo just put us through. Anything else you want to say about this slide, Joe, before I move on?
Nope, that's all good. Thanks.
Slide. Okay, a couple more slides and then we can open it up. All right, so we recognize here at DEC that in releasing this phase 1 report, the data, and then leading into phase 2, which is developing mitigation strategies, that an effective community emissions reduction program will have a community engagement at its foundation. And so we have put together a proposal that has input from communities across the state, but particularly in the study areas, as a central component of the mitigation strategy development process to drive solutions that will be most responsive to community needs, priorities, and lived experiences of New Yorkers who live in the study area and in disadvantaged communities and similar communities statewide. As Margaret mentioned earlier, we also recognize that some of the problems identified will demand solutions that may be beyond the scope of the Community Air Monitoring Initiative and even beyond the scope of DEC's regulatory jurisdiction. And so what we've put together is a comprehensive approach that with input from partners across the state to develop mitigation strategies that include multiple agencies at the state, city, and local level. We think that their involvement is critical in order to successfully address the issues identified in disadvantaged communities through this program. And wanted to reiterate that under the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, all state agencies are required to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and co-pollutants in disadvantaged communities. And so we sent around I believe all climate justice working group members should have a draft proposal sort of laying out what this next phase means for climate justice working group involvement in the next phase in the statewide mitigation strategies development. And that we are really interested in hearing from you all on that process. And if you have any input about the effort that we're putting together, that includes an interagency working group to work through the mitigation strategies, and also convening the working group and our community advisory committees that we've created to sort of bring everyone together and develop these statewide mitigation strategies. So that is something that we would love your input on. And to support that, we'll also just note that just as we have over the past year or two that this has been going on, the Office of Environmental Justice will continue to develop grants that helps to support community air monitoring and capacity building, so that folks have, if they're interested, support in and can compete for grants from OEJ to support some of this engagement effort undertaking. Sorry, next slide. Okay, so local air monitoring results and community input can help inform investments in disadvantaged communities to reduce air pollution. Particularly, we're interested in areas that are near the sensitive receptor locations that Dr. Mardo went over. with vulnerable populations like children, our elders, people with pre-existing health conditions, people with disabilities that may be more susceptible to the effects of air pollution. And we also recognize that people living in disadvantaged communities face intersecting issues that are the result of not just these exposures, right, but economic, health, and other environmental burdens. And so therefore, the state needs to take a comprehensive approach to addressing intersecting issues, for example, air pollution, health, housing, energy, security, and other concerns so that we can make sure that our solutions are meeting New Yorkers' needs most effectively. All right, that's it for us. And I'll turn it over to Margaret for some questions from the group.
Okay, can everybody see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Now, I can't see anybody. Okay, Eddie, I see that you have your hand raised.
Is jump in time?
Jump on in.
Hey guys, sorry. Apologies. Yeah, this has been helpful, appreciated, and I have actually some contextual questions before we dive into this, if that's okay. I was just wondering, and by the way, I appreciate the attempt to try to make it more user friendly and trying to find through the story maps a way to make the information more accessible, if you will. I will say that I found the platform really challenging. I found trying to navigate and trying to find what it was I was looking for, and then trying to find how it connected with the communities that I was most interested in. It was just difficult to navigate, but appreciate the effort. So I don't want to be completely negative about that. Obviously, I did have a couple of quick questions before we dive into the presentation. It was our understanding that the air quality data would have been released along with a report from ACLIMA in like March or April of this year. And so we now have the story maps and this information that's come out months later without an actual kind of report I think that we were expecting. And I don't know whether in fact the story maps are intended to be the report that was expected from ACLIMA. So can you all just share with us why the study's been delayed 6 months, or at least why the sharing of the results were delayed 5-6 months, and also what is it about the actual report that we can expect, or is this pretty much the conclusion of what we can expect in terms of this initial round of testing?
So, yeah, so it did take us a little longer. As you know, our contractor ACLIMA, they provided just their product was the annual block by block concentrations. But as we were looking at the data, when we had that preliminary look, we realized that 1 second data was really valuable, especially for the intent of this project, which was to identify sources of air pollution. So we did take some time to develop these tools that you see in the story maps, and put everything in this one report. So this report is the results report, our phase 1 report. You know, I understand that when you first get in it, it may be a little bit different. And that is one reason why we do have office hours. We are going to be going out to the communities and having laptops set up. We'll have information sessions to explain the story maps and help walk the community members through these. Trying to remember if there was anything else in your question that I needed to get to, but Adriana, maybe you picked something else up.
I have more, no worries.
Okay.
I don't know if I gave the wrong message by turning my camera on. I don't remember other part of
Okay.
Eddie's
No,
question, but
I
I'm
saw
sure
you
he'll
turn on
remind
your
us
camera.
if we
So-
forgot something. Eddie, please continue.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And apologies, folks. I've got a number of these, so I'll stop and turn it over to fellow members of the working group in a second. But There was something else that jumped out at us that we were, if I'm actually reading this correctly, but it appeared to us that the study, the air quality testing that was done exclusively in disadvantaged communities in DACs, as opposed to what we had always suspected or hoped would happen would be that there would be testing of DACs and non-DACs, because otherwise what we're seeing is we're comparing, impacted communities to each other rather than impacted communities to communities that aren't impacted, which feels more like an apples to apples comparison as opposed to apple versus the core comparison. Like it just seems to me like we are missing the actual EJ story, which is, yeah, we know these communities are impacted, but how do they fare compared to non-disadvantaged communities? So just curious, like, why did we just look at disadvantaged communities and not have a baseline comparison to non-disadvantaged communities?
So I do think we went over this when we were selecting the communities, but the Climate Act specifically said to monitor in disadvantaged communities. That was our charge. Because we had such a large area to cover, we really did have to focus on what the Climate Act required, which was monitoring within disadvantaged communities. And the Climate Act doesn't say to compare between disadvantaged communities and non-disadvantaged communities, but what it does tell us to do is to identify sources that are contributing to air burdens. We selected these communities based on the air burden criteria of the disadvantaged communities criteria. So we're already going under the assumption that these communities are impacted disproportionately by air pollution. So again, we're not comparing one disadvantaged community to the other. We're comparing these areas to see where there are similarities for sources that we can identify mitigation and reduce air pollution. It's really a solution-driven study. It's not a comparison. We understand that these communities are disproportionately burdened.
No, I appreciate that, Margaret. I think that had some of the people that were involved in the drafting of the law realized that pieces of it would be taken verbatim, I think we would have said maybe to compare it to not. It's just, how can I put this? It's almost, for us, we took it as a common sense expectation that when you're monitoring a community, you're comparing it to something, right? Like that was the whole point of the testing, was to compare it to something. And had we known that we would just be compared to each other, because that's what the report does. It is comparing one community that's impacted to another community that's impacted. It's hard to see this as anything other than that. Yes, I
We've
just
been
think
very
that,
careful not to make those comparisons and instead really focus on where the sources are and what is causing the areas of higher pollution.
right? No, it's
And
not that
I-
you guys are comparing, but by putting the information, if you only looked at these disadvantaged communities, the natural impulse is just as a person to compare one to the other. There's just no comparison to communities that are not disadvantaged communities. So I get what you're saying, but it also it raises, I think, unrealistic expectations on people reading the report to not compare it to among disadvantaged. But I'll stop. I'll stop because I know there's
I think that we can possibly do more to make sure we're being clear about what the study is and isn't designed to do and how folks can and should be using it. I think maybe that can come out during some of the office hours that Margaret said, but certainly in our public documents, we should make that clear. I think it's important to underscore one point that Margaret made, though, that the inequality is the presumption that the state made, right? So that's why we're not doing a comparison, because when we were defining the study boundaries in the first place, we chose the communities that DEC and the state had evidence of were already overburdened in the state for air pollution. And so the inequality is baked in, and that we're only monitoring communities that are overburdened with air pollution.
No, I get that part. I guess what I'm saying is that if you're looking at 10 communities and you're only looking at those 10 communities, the natural impulse is to compare within those communities, the communities that are being looked at, and without I don't want to belabor this, but it just seems to me that any basic comparative analysis would have established a baseline of non-disadvantaged communities, and this study doesn't do that. So, but let's keep going. And by the way, one of the other things that I mentioned, one of the reasons why how this data is collected and presented, and the reason why it feels so inaccessible, is by virtue of the fact that you guys are saying we need to have office hours and laptops that have to walk people through it, by definition means it's inaccessible. And I think that the whole point of collecting this data and making it publicly available would be for people to be able to navigate it on their own and not have to kind of like be trained to walk through the data. So, and by the way, there was one other thing that you guys mentioned, and I'll stop there because I know there are I suspect there are other questions. The other thing that I find a little troubling is how the mitigation conversation is going to happen by including other state agencies and city agencies, right? Like what happens when, in the case of, say, in communities that have sewage treatment plants, like we're going to be including the New York City DEP, even though they're the ones polluting in these communities with their waste treatment. Like what is their affirmative responsibility to, like, in other words, you're going to be inviting in some of the very same actors that are responsible for the pollution loads to mitigate their own pollution. And that raises questions because, like, these are agencies, some of them are environmental agencies themselves who, it's hard for me to see the level of confidence that EJ advocates are going to have, as opposed to what I thought this process was going to be, where advocates and community leaders would talk directly to the state and share with you guys what our mitigation recommendations are, without having to get into arguments with DEP or DOT or the others that some of your own data shows that the impacts are coming from these entities. So again, this seems to me like a different approach than what we had at least intended when the law passed, and what up until this moment I thought that the mitigation conversation was going to be. But I'll stop there. Thank you.
I'm going to answer a little bit on the story maps, and then maybe you want to take the mitigation part, Adriana. But on the story maps, I think, I know our intent was, we didn't want to do a standard report where DEC is telling you, this is the result. This is what's important. These story maps were designed to be interactive so that we can work with the communities to understand not only where there are areas where it's higher air pollution and there's a source nearby, but what areas are a priority. There may be some areas where it's higher pollution, but there aren't any sensitive receptors or people living there. So it's a lower priority. We want to make sure that we're working with the communities and meeting their lived experience to come up with these strategies. Now, on the mitigation phase, Adriana's going to take part of that, but yes, we're going to have to work with some of those state agencies because it's not all DEC that can make some of these solutions happen.
Yeah, and just to add to that, Margaret, thank you, is the scenario you described, Eddie, of, leaving it to the communities to argue with lots of state and city entities about the solutions is not the scenario I want or DEC wants to set up either. And so I think we put together a proposal that tries to not create that scenario. And but I think we went back and forth a lot and heard from lots of different folks about, like, some wanting a space that was separate from governmental entities, even separate sometimes from DEC, to be able to discuss priorities, lived experiences, and existing work that's done on the ground in spaces that are community driven only. And then we heard from some folks that are like, no, if you don't have the polluters in the room, how effective are we going to be? So we heard lots of different perspectives as we were building this out. And so I think the proposal, which is still draft, so we still have opportunity to clean it up around the edges, to your point, Eddie, if based on concerns like this. But the proposal we put forth is a space that is EJ stakeholders only and DEC and developing community priorities, or community by community. So each one of the 10 communities having their own priorities, and that table is not set by DEC or any other state or local entity. And then we recognize that once we have those, we inherently have to have more people at the table, because DEC can only go so far in being able to actualize some of the solutions. Some of them are going to be regulatory, some might be different investments, some of them may be clean energy investments that are maybe more well equipped for NYSERDA to act upon. And so we needed to create a bigger tent to get through the solutions. But my hope is that that doesn't infringe upon the priority setting that happens by communities at the very beginning. So they're sort of bifurcated in my proposal, but I'm interested in hearing your feedback on that. Don't know who had their hand up first, but I want to say it was like Department of Health. Or maybe not. Chris.
Saw Elizabeth's hand go
Oh,
up
Elizabeth.
first. Yes.
Hi. It's good to hear that this is just a draft, because there are a lot of questions that we have, and those of us who've been doing this work for a minute had a challenging time navigating our way through this, and we can't imagine how people in our communities wouldn't have a hard time if we had a hard time. So it's not as interactive and as user-friendly as it is being presented as. I have a bunch of questions, and I'll just ask a few, and then I'll move on, and then probably circle back. But in the report, you talk about nighttime and daytime. You basically say that samples were taken just all day and all night. What does that mean? Is there information on how data compares at a certain time every day in a certain place? How does it compare to the evening? What exactly does all day and all night mean? Because it feels like this really loose description. When we're talking about data, we're talking about specificity, and already we learned that there's no baseline. So if you could provide with more information about that, that would be great for us to know. When was it taken?
Sure.
Where
So-
was it taken, and how does it compare?
All right. So again, these very large study areas, the cars drove, they had different routes each day, different drivers, but the contractor, their process is to drive each one of the road segments within the study area at least 20 times across the year of data collection. They needed to cover different times of the day, different days of the week, and months of the year to have good coverage. It's not to say that they were driving 24 hours a day throughout that entire time. It's that they passed each street segment at least 20 times and captured different times of the day and different times of the year.
Different
We
times and
have,
different days. Where does that live in the report?
that is data that is it's kind of buried in the data. There is a fact sheet that explains this a little better, but this was the process, and this was something that we spoke about at one of our previous meetings with you on how
You've said that
our
before,
contract
but let
was.
me let me just stop you for a second, Margaret. You've said that you've had this conversation with us. If it's buried in the data, then how is Doña Julia in the community supposed to access information to find out what the exposure is in the particular place that she's living in at any particular time?
So
I'm
these
sorry.
data are 1 second at a time. Every data point is 1 second. So each roadway segment is only 1 second of data as they're traveling, or a few seconds, but each as they're traveling. We have data for every second throughout the study area. As Joe was showing, like those peaks, you can click on it. It tells you what time and day that it was collected. The contractor, Aclima, what they collect is they collect that data and then they model it to get an annual value. So the map of the annual values is modeled data based on the monitoring they did. What DEC did was take a look at that second by second data and create these tools so that if you look at the focus spots or the peaks, you can click on the area that's a peak and it will tell you the days and times that that data was collected.
In the chat, I inserted a question about how DEC will incorporate non-ACLMA local air testing done by grassroots groups like the CHAMP EJ report and any South Bronx testing. Can someone answer that?
Sure, I can take a stab at that, Margaret, if you want to add on to it. So
Okay.
if I recall correctly, I think there are some grassroots efforts that are called out in the report itself. So we refer back and link out to particularly those who were grantees of DEC's EJ program to do some air monitoring work. And so we solicited input from stakeholders in the communities to sort of call out and link directly to their work. But to your larger question, Elizabeth, of like, what does that mean operationally in the mitigation strategies and like how we make decisions about priorities and investments going forward? I think that is on the table for discussion within this next phase of the work. I think where we are now was releasing DEC's data that we have. And what I'm hoping is that, we can engage even folks that we didn't know about already, grassroots initiatives we didn't know about already that have done similar work in disadvantaged communities, and then figure out together like how to package these together to make sure that we have the best picture, most scientifically driven picture possible to drive decision making about how the state prioritizes emissions reductions.
Okay, thanks. I'm good for now. I have a bunch of other questions, but I'll circle back.
Eddie, is that a legacy hand, or you have more questions?
No, I got more. I'm just waiting for my colleagues to jump in if they have any first.
I don't see any other hands up, Eddie, so have at it.
Sure. Thanks, Alana. And by the way, Adriana, I'm not sure. I mean, I heard, and we did see, and I think this is the reason why we were asking the question. We saw mention of the other grassroots air testing, but what wasn't clear in the press release was how that would be incorporated. And I'm not sure. Did you? And it's fair if you guys haven't completely figured or worked that out yet, but I didn't hear like a response to how it's going, how these other studies are going to be, how that data is going to be incorporated in mitigation conversations. I mean, I don't know if you guys are just looking at groups that have gotten DEC grants. NEJA has never gotten a DEC grant. That's a different conversation for another day, but we did our own fundraising and did our own CHAMP EJ community heat and air monitoring project, and we sent it on to DEC. So you guys have that study with its findings, but just out of curiosity, whether it's a DEC funded study or an independently funded study like ours, what I'm hearing is the intention is to include the data and findings, but how it's going to be included is not quite worked out. Is that right?
I think that's fair to say, Eddie. Yeah, that we haven't quite figured out like what that means for developing community priorities and figuring out mitigation strategies, but we are committed to doing so in a way that is respectful of the pre-existing work that happened before DEC's program and the ongoing work. And Margaret or someone who worked on the story maps can probably provide more accurate information, but I think I'm not sure if what we have linked in there right now is exclusively DEC EJ grants. But regardless, if it is or if it's not, that we don't have blinders on to, we only care about studies that were funded by us. Like we're open to anything that my technical team tells me is QA QC and is good to include, I'm down to include.
Yeah, and
Thank you.
again, I think there are some studies out there that might help us identify the sources better or in tandem with this data. So open to other studies, and yes, Eddie, we do have your data, and I know we've had a few people that have worked with you on some pieces of that.
And NICAS is a good example of this, right? Like that's obviously not as,
NICAS, yeah, exactly. That's New York City Department of Health's NICAS data is a really great data source, and will definitely be something that we'll look at as well.
Thanks so much, Margaret. Yeah, and for what it's worth, I mean, we obviously are, Nija's been a long time fan of mobile and hyperlocal air testing because I don't know about you all, but we don't breathe regulated air. We breathe the kind of air that was kind of measured by all these different studies. So yeah, speaking of the difference between centers, what's regulated, what's ready for prime time regulation, as well as stuff that is it's not designed to be incorporated or addressed through the typical regulatory system, but reflects the actual day-to-day kind of reality on the ground. And I guess one of the things that jumped out at us was, and maybe again I'm misinterpreting the data, but one of the things that we were not clear about is you guys. I mean, in the report, it was stated that the kind of mobile air testing that was done is not the kind that meets a regulatory standard. But then I thought you guys, and I heard earlier or an earlier comment in this call that there was that the EPA has not developed standards for these kinds of measurements and what its public health impacts are. But am I wrong? Like it seemed like you guys tried to do something, right? Like we saw, and one is I want to make sure that am I reading, are we reading this correctly? And if so, how did you guys arrive at this? It seems like you guys were drawing like a threshold of 100 micrograms per cubic meter for PM 2.5 and 9 for the year. The long-term threshold is 9 for the year for the EPA. But you guys picked up, well, let me rephrase. So it's 100 micrograms per cubic meter for PM 2.5, and it seems that you guys were picking 28 micrograms. Am I? Yeah, I think I'm
I'd have to look at the
converting my
specifics,
numbers.
but
Yeah.
so those second by second measurements, because
Mm.
again, our EPA's National Ambient Air Quality Standards all come with an averaging time. So it's not fair to compare a 1 second reading with a 24-hour or an annual number. So those thresholds were actually set based on the data statistics to know, we set some thresholds that if it was over that threshold, and we looked at the statistics, and so there's different things for the focus areas, and then for the peaks analysis, and there are different thresholds used there, I believe. And Joe or Dom are going to be the best people to explain some of those for you. For the annual averages that ACLMA put together, because there is an annual National Ambient Air Quality Standard, we did want to put that data in context. But again, because of the way it was measured and then modeled, it's not a direct comparison. So it's not like our regulatory monitors that go through all the rigorous QA, QC, and it's a much more sophisticated instrument and citing criteria and all that we can make that comparison. And for EPA and DEC regulatory purposes, but we did want to have those annual averages. We wanted to be able to put those into context to
Gotcha.
the standard.
No, thanks, Mark. To us, it just seemed like the threshold seemed arbitrary
Yeah.
and very high compared to what the research says are safe levels.
Yeah.
But I'm sorry, I heard somebody trying to
Yeah,
jump in.
no,
Joe,
I would love to chime in for just a moment. So a couple of things. First of all, one of our fact sheets is a technical addendum fact sheet. which has the performance metrics for the instruments. We did do a comparison against two of our DEC regulatory monitor sites, Rochester and Queens. When we say like for a baseline, we are comparing their performance against that. So that's just one thing that I think is important to add. And then the other thing for the thresholds, yeah, they're a little bit arbitrary, but also not. I mean, they are based on around the 99.9th and 99.99th percentiles within the data. And instead of being like a hard cutoff threshold, it's when an algorithm stopped. It was going to continue to run until it reached this point, which is based on what we saw within the data itself. So it's not like we just pick a number out of thin air. It's based on some scientific reasoning behind that. So I hope that gives a little bit more insight. Yeah.
Joe, I'd
And
also
Joe,
like
you
to add
mentioned,
too that the EPA set sensor 1 minute sensor thresholds to look at sources. So they did define for PM 2.5, it was 70 micrograms and above. And when that measurement was taken, it usually was near a source, such as wildfire smoke or an emission source. So it is based on the EPA guidance and the sensor guidebook. And we used a lot of the concepts and ideas from the EPA sensor guidebook to help write about the science and what we're trying to convey here. So I just want to say that we're really interested in working with you so you can find our story maps easier to use. And I think once we sit down with people in the communities with the maps or people attend the office hours, we can have that one-on-one interaction that I hope will be helpful. And we have looked at some of the Camp EJ reports and looked at our data analyses. And I think they're pretty consistent that we're seeing some of the same higher pollution areas that you measured with your sensors. We do know that the sensors will pick up that signal and it's an indication of a source. And that has been our focus. But we really want to work with you. Our intent here was to be very transparent and show you the data and help you see where the patterns are to help identify the sources. So hope that helps.
Thanks for that, Marilyn. Yeah, so when you guys have the office hours and the one-on-ones, you overlooked a couple of things. Folks gonna have to bring laptops and Joe, what is it that you said earlier, Joe, what accompanies this is a technical guide, and what was the other thing? Technical guide and
So on the main project page, there are a whole bunch of different fact sheets, PDFs, and one of them is the technical addendum, which tells you about the performance metrics of the sensors specifically, how well they performed.
it was the addendum and the addendum captures what again? I'm sorry?
The performance metrics.
The performance metrics. Marilyn, when I hear all that, with each further clarification and toolbox to help us understand the story map, it becomes less and less accessible. Do you understand what I'm saying? There's a bunch of contextual pieces that are required in order for somebody to properly follow all this. And that's what I mean, that's why I appreciate the story map approach, but it would have been useful for some of us to have like a report that we can actually go through that collects the data and presents it in a way that's more transparent and not kind of, it also feels like, because of the regulatory gaps that exist, and it's not the state's fault, it's just there's tons of regulatory gaps in everything we try to get done in
Sure.
terms of regulatory effect. So it's not its fault, but I think what we're capturing by hearing all the different pieces that we need in order to properly understand this study and its findings is that our communities and the air problems that we're facing are kind of get lost in these regulatory gaps, which is why we were hoping this study would be easier for us to be able to follow. Let me give you an example. Like one of the things that I had difficulty finding is, for stationary sources, what is the pollution looking like coming out of specific power plants, transfer stations. And again, it could be that that was, given the mobile nature of the testing, that was something that maybe would have been harder to capture through the mobile testing, which means that it might have been useful to have a few stationary monitors be part of this mix. We did that for our testing, for example. Is there a reason, first of all, is there a way to find the actual pollution being generated from specific sites? And if so, where does that data live?
Yeah, so any of the permitted stationary sources, you can see those on DEC's website on DEC info. And I don't think we included this here just because a lot more data layers, but any permitted facility, you can pull up the permit and it lists all the pollutants that are emitted and any permit limits, and any of the information, the whole permit is there.
I'd also like to just add that I hope you will be happier maybe with our phase 2 report, because it's then that we hope to draw some of these conclusions after we've been in the communities, we've talked to people, we've understood their air pollution concerns. We realize that this data set, it's mobile monitoring, it has its limitations. That's why it was so important to put it out there to the communities, to talk with them. And then phase 2, we're hoping to have more of what I think you're looking for within the bounds of this study. Draw the conclusions after we've talked with everyone. So, I think maybe we could do a better job at conveying what this phase 1 is and what the intent of this is. And then maybe, with phase 2, as we get more input from the Climate Justice Working Group and other stakeholders, we'll be able to provide you with the report that you're looking for. That is our hope. So it's always been, this phase 1 has been meant to be collaborative and to engage people, and we thought the story maps would be the best way to do that, because how else do we show you the data with the layers? And it would have been very difficult to produce that in a lengthy report because of the level of resolution, the data. I just don't even know how we would do that. It would be very challenging. So that's why we took this approach.
I think your point is well taken, Eddie, that like this is a little overcomplicated, not the most user friendly, and it's hard to go dive in there and find the simple information that you're looking to find, and then take that back to your communities. Like I hear you, and I get that. I think our intent here hopefully is coming through, that what we tried to do was to develop something that was more interactive. That way it's not New York State producing a 200-page PDF that draws the conclusion about the air that you breathe every day, right? And says exactly, this is what we found, this is what's happening. But instead, we try to create something interactive so that those discussions can happen over time in spaces that are both community set and also state table set as well. And so that was our intent, but I hear you that maybe we overcomplicated it. But our point is that you can go in, toggle on the different facilities you're interested in, toggle on the specific pollutants, and see what the data shows you without New York State having made that conclusion for you and said, this is what's happening in this area. And so I hope that the benefit isn't being lost here, even if it's, as you said, a little bit complicated to understand.
Elizabeth's hand was up.
Thanks. Thank you, Adriana. There's a saying that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So it really doesn't, when it comes to what our communities need to access it, we understand the intention, but if it's not usable after so many resources were invested in making this happen, then it's not usable. And if we're having trouble navigating our way through it, then our aunties are going to have trouble. And that's the bottom line. People talk about community, they romanticize when they're talking about it in this call. And these are real people with real lives with a lot of different responsibilities who may not necessarily have the time to wade their way through the complexity of the way that this was presented. My question has to do with the DEC press release. The DEC press release claims that the study found air quality has improved in many areas statewide and modeled annual pollutant levels along most road segments indicate better air quality for fine particulate matter. From my understanding, the study doesn't find this. Other studies may have, but they're not referenced in the study. It also says that disadvantaged communities may experience higher pollution pollution levels, and people pretty much want a yes or a no. And if you don't have the data for this, then you have to say it. You can't say may. Saying may is not very useful, and this isn't what the project, I think, was set out to find. And then we also have concerns about possible biases and limitations of the project and need to look at how the findings correspond to community knowledge and experience. And I think you've already said that in the second phase, you will be doing that. So I just wanted to share some of this because it's concerning to us. Like the word may doesn't give us anything. And again, earlier I was talking about specificity. If you are hiring people to provide specificity, then using this kind of loose language that doesn't give anything to our community to sink their teeth into is not really helpful.
Thank you for that, Elizabeth. I appreciate it, and don't have the press release open in front of me, but your point's well taken that the language that we use in there matters.
Can you answer, do you know what additional or longer term air monitoring is going to be conducted to strengthen and supplement this work?
I can't say exactly what that will look like now, because I think that's what we are kicking off in launching phase 2, right? It is looking at this data together and trying to understand what are we seeing and what are we not seeing? What are the gaps, which I think some of which we're learning on this call, just by having this conversation. And then making recommendations on follow-up monitoring that may be needed. So I can't say exactly where and it will happen, but I think the peaks that are in the map right now is at least a good starting place to see, like, here's what the data suggests that we should look at, but then the next step is to inform that by community knowledge, right? And understanding of, maybe we think this facility in this community is a source, but we can't quite tell because of just the nature of mobile monitoring. So this is probably a good candidate for stationary monitoring as a follow-up. So like that is part of all the next steps, but none of that has been predetermined, I think, intentionally on our part.
And when we get to the mitigation phase, will there be monitoring of the mitigation strategies to assess their effectiveness?
I think that depends on what the mitigation is. And, if it's, I think it depends. That can be part of the recommendation. If there are certain strategies that are being recommended to be implemented, along with that might be monitoring.
Margaret, I don't think I understand your response.
So I think if it's
that it depends on the mitigation.
Right. Some of the mitigation we're talking about is exposure mitigation. So things like increased filtration in schools, perhaps, or electrifying the school buses, prioritizing the electrification of certain school bus districts first. So does that need follow-up monitoring? Probably not, because you're eliminating the emission source. So I think it depends on the mitigation strategy, whether monitoring is something that needs to go along with it.
I think maybe what I'm hearing from Elizabeth, though, and I would never want to speak for Elizabeth, so let me know if I'm interpreting it wrong, but it's like, whether it's follow-up monitoring or not, like, are we putting mechanisms in place to track all of the recommendations. That way we're like this, we can ensure efficacy, right, of
Okay.
the programs and initiatives going on.
So
Yeah,
that,
Adriana,
yes.
and Adriana, and I disagree that it depends on the mitigation. I disagree because if you can't tell the story of how the mitigation made things better for the recipient, for the host community, then what are we doing here? We want to be able to show that these interventions make a difference, and we want to be able to illustrate that by data. So I don't get the sort of it depends on the mitigation response.
I
Thanks,
think we
Elizabeth.
can
We
show
can-
the efficacy without necessarily, you know, the monitoring doesn't have to be the same monitoring study again to show the efficacy of some of these strategies. I think that's something that,
I understand that, but I never
Yeah.
said that. I
Okay.
didn't say what the strategy needed to be. I just wanted to find out if there is an affirmative effort to monitor the mitigation strategies so that
All
we
right.
can say that communities are benefiting from these interventions.
Okay, I'm
But-
sorry, I misunderstood.
I think
So
that's
yes.
important, and
Yes.
we can take that back. We have at least flagged it as something that needs to be resolved in the sort of draft proposal that I sent around as far as like long-term steps for this work. But I appreciate you raising it, Elizabeth.
Anybody else? Because I got one or two. Anybody else got a hand up? Can I jump in?
Yeah, go for it.
Oh, Adriana, could I trouble you to, yeah, could you please resend that draft proposal? Because I don't think I saw it, and it's usually my fault because the emails are tsunamis these days. But yeah, if you could resend it, I really appreciate it. The other question I had was, this is a little sensitive, but so you know, it's been said a number of times, both in the report and verbally here, that the data that's collected can't be used for regulatory purposes, right? Um, that begs the question, though, if that's the case, how is that unregulated air that was tested? I'm botching this, but how do you use that if all of the permits that are issued are based on regulatory compliance? So I'm not saying that the data is unreliable, but there is a question there. There can be some pushback from certain entities that are like, well, what are you guys talking about? According to our permits, we are within a permit level. We're not so I'm just curious about how you guys reconcile what is data that's for unregulated exposure, and how we can then justify using that data to impose what feels like a regulatory response, right? Because that's what permit analysis and defense and renewals involve. I'll stop there. I think you guys
Yeah.
are
So
probably
that
doing a
that
better
is,
job interpreting what I'm saying than what I'm actually saying.
I think I do understand what you're saying. So what happens if we see this data shows that there is a stationary source with a permit is the source that's causing an area of higher pollution? And that source, you're right, they could be meeting all of the terms of their permit, right? All their permit conditions are being met. We will have to, and if that's a DEC permit, that is something we're going to have to take back and do some more work on. And we may have to do some additional monitoring or some additional analyses to go back to the facility and really push on that. And there could be different strategies to help us do that. So, if it's, say, one of our agency partners who it's their facility, that might be a lift that's a little different for us than, say, a private industry. But there are different strategies that we can use to work with the the permitted facility to bring those emissions down and have a real impact on the nearby areas.
Gotcha, I
It'll take
appreciate
some work. I'm not gonna lie, it's gonna take some work.
Yeah, no, totally, Margaret. I mean, it just flies in the face. Like, some of this stuff
Right.
feels counterintuitive, right? Like I don't even remember if it was you guys or DEP, but last summer where government is talking about high pollution near coal and wood-fired pizza ovens, but we're not able to extract more definitive
wasn't us.
information. Right. I thought it was DEP, but DEP, physician heal thyself is all I could say about DEP's findings. But let me ask, I think, another kind of related question. A lot of what's happening here, and a lot of our problems over the years has to do with, frankly, the cumulative impact of all this stuff. And there's an EJ siting law that passed, and just curious, like, that is completely, totally connected to what we're trying to do here, but we have no sense of when the EJ siting law regs are going to be issued and what's the follow-up. Can you guys give us some sort of sense of how that's unfolding and how that's going to play out in so far as this initiative is unfolding?
Sure. I will start that one and turn it over to Alana if she's got anything she wants to add there. But I think you're spot on in that assertion, Eddie, that we've got a mandate now to look at burdens holistically in disadvantaged communities, and we have a rulemaking process that is underway. We expect to release some draft regulations in the coming months that will have a comment period for folks to be able to add to. So
Adriana, is that the best you're going to give me in the coming months? I was hoping for something a little more definitive.
Listen,
Coming
I would
months.
love to tell you this week, but I can't tell you this week. And part of that is what we're doing is really novel. The agency in the state of New York has never taken up anything like this. And in thinking about weighing different burdens against each other, and how do you look at sensor data versus regulatory data, and how do you look at the existing epidemiological studies that have for health, and what does that mean for permitting? Like, these are all really tough questions that the DEC and the state is grappling with. So I wish I could provide you more definitive on where we are, but I will say that separate from the rulemaking, but related, is we have to develop a scope for what's called an existing burden report. And so every time you have an action under an applicable permit under this law, you have to produce this report. And we have to release for public comment the scope of what that looks like. And I think your comment here fits perfectly within that arena, right? Because that tells us what are the rules of the road, what does DEC need to look at when we're evaluating burdens in disadvantaged communities. And that's really the place to add your questions and your comments about, like, well, what about the CAM data, and what about NICAS, or like other areas where you want to make sure these different things are talking to each other. So I wish I had a more direct answer for you.
Or the feedback that the agency's already gotten from a lot of us, right? I guess what I'm wondering is, do you guys anticipate another input session before, like, the express items, whatever the next iteration of the study? Is there going to be any sort of pre-release input sessions, or at this point we're going to be basically reacting to the next draft that comes out? If that doesn't make any sense, we could talk offline about that.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to talk offline more about this. My understanding is that the next steps are that DEC puts pen to paper and we give the stakeholders something to react to. So the next step is we put a draft out there, and that's where we re-engage. I don't think there's another input session before we do so, but Alana, you can weigh in if I'm misunderstanding.
No, there isn't any plan for another input session, mostly because we do have a deadline that we are working with. As we know, this all goes into effect on December 30th, and we do need to give not just DEC folks, but municipalities at least something that they can follow. So what we're going to do is we are going to obviously take what we've gotten from the stakeholder sessions into account. We're going to put pen to paper, and we are going to look to get things out as soon as we possibly can, recognizing that, the crafting of novel rules, it takes longer than a year, which is what we were kind of given in the legislation. So we really want to make sure that what we're doing is effective and that we're getting this right. So I'm not saying 100% no, we will never talk to you again after this. I'm saying that at this particular point, we're not looking to hold another stakeholder session, but we could potentially be open to things changing, but probably not in this year.
Thanks for that, Alana. Yeah, I think a lot of us are growing concerned. There are a number of signs where the state, and I'm not trying to pick on DEC, seriously, not, but we've seen across the board numerous milestones connected to the CLCPA being missed, being kicked down the road, being what. And so like it's the combination of milestones being moved, and then using the very milestones to like kind of limit some of the public commenting is worrisome. I mean, put aside the EJ citing regs, which I think you guys saw or can pick up that we have additional input. Really want to see where the draft is going to take us. But the extreme heat plan, right? Like we I can't remember. And correct me if I'm wrong. I'm relatively certain that the state heat plan, which again, like if we're talking about air quality, the heat Venn diagram that the overlap that heat does with air quality clearly has public health implications as well. But am I wrong? Like I thought that the state heat plan did not offer a 60-day public comment period. And if so, that's kind of weird, and just I don't mean to take I'm sorry. I've watched too much of the DNC last night. I'm not trying to use the word misappropriate the word weird, but you guys get what I'm saying. Like how can a statewide initiative coming up with an extreme heat plan for the state not have a public comment period? And unless I'm getting that wrong. Sorry.
It's interesting that you mentioned the extreme heat plan, because that is what we're coming to next. And that is actually a question that can probably be answered by Dr. Leo Backinger. And I'm not trying to cut you off, Eddie, but we are down to our last 29 minutes. So I want to try to make sure that you get an opportunity to ask Leo all of your questions, because judged on how much time you guys spent with the community air monitoring, you're probably going to have a lot of questions for Leo, and I want him to be able to answer them. So we can definitely take some of this offline, but I really want to make sure that we give Leo an opportunity to talk, and he has an opportunity to address some of your questions. So I'm just going to turn it over to him now, since you mentioned the segue.
All right, and hi everybody. As Alana mentioned, my name is Leo Backinger. I'm a program manager with the Office of Climate Change here at DEC. With me is also Mark Lowry, Assistant Director of the office. And we are here to give you an overview of the Extreme Heat Action Plan. I will try to keep it a little bit more high level so we can make sure to get to questions and have ample time of questions, especially considering we have only 30 minutes left. But I want to preface with one important note. I'll only very briefly, but not in depth, touch on the extreme heat, part of our extreme heat work that's focused on the urban heat island mapping. We've talked with you about that about a couple of months ago. We just kicked off this project and announced it, and are working right now with our a contractor with SUNY ESF and Davis Tree on pinning down engagement. So we do want to engage with the Climate Justice Working Group, as well as with many other interested parties, on making sure that the products we develop in the urban heat island mapping, that they meet the needs of different practitioners and what that should look like. And so we'll engage with the members of this group on that more. The second part, and that leads to the Extreme Heat Action Plan itself, as well as the companion report that we released with it, which is a summary report on extreme heat impacts on New York State. We invite ongoing feedback, comments on the plan. I'll touch on how that can work, or how that feedback can be submitted to us. And we collate all of that feedback and share it with the different work group members, Extreme Heat Action Plan work group members, and also intend on doing pre-summer preparedness progress summaries where we connect with that back. But all that being said, extreme heat action plan. Maybe if we can jump to slide 25. The Extreme Heat Action Plan was released in June. And with it, we also released what we call the Extreme Heat in New York State Summary Report. This talks about what are heat impacts, current and future. It provides projections for climate for extreme heat in the context of climate change, and talks about vulnerabilities to extreme heat, some existing tools for how to identify vulnerable communities, such as the Heat Vulnerability Index, the CDC EPA heat risk tool, but also the Urban Heat Island mapping project that we are undertaking, and of course the disadvantaged community criteria, amongst others. Next slide, please. I'm going to give you a very, very quick overview of what's in the plan, but I won't spend too much time because this should be, or I presume, is fairly familiar. A lot of this information of why extreme heat is important, not least comes from communities on the front line of exposure. But we know that heat and health, heat has significant impacts on health. This is analysis by Department of Health for 2 heat episodes, one in September 2023, one in June 2024, that essentially shows how with an increase in heat index and temperatures, we see an increase in ED visits. The heat summary report talks a bit more and more in depth on heat health impacts, amongst others. Next page, next slide, please. The summary report also talks about projections. The main high-level storyline here is extreme heat is already severely impacting the state, and with climate change will have impacts across the state. A good example is St. Lawrence Valley, 1 to 2 heat waves a decade in the historic trend line. We anticipate to have 1 to 3 heat waves a year by mid-century. So these are significant impacts that are not only concentrated to urban centers or areas that already have severe impacts, but that are longer term also spreading across the state with significant impacts. Next slide, please. The summary report also gives high-level highlights on how heat impacts communities in different ways, be it rural communities, urban, suburban communities, in relationship with heat waves themselves and ecosystems. I won't go too much into detail here. We can talk about it more, but I want to make sure that we get to the heat plan itself and can have a conversation about that too. The next 3 slides point to some resources for identifying impacts and vulnerabilities. Next slide, please. One is the Department of Health Heat Vulnerability Index. There's a link here. We'll share those slides, I presume, that has also links to those tools. And the summary report talks also about how those can be used for targeting and identifying vulnerable areas. But the plan itself also includes enhancement of some tools, and importantly, also the Heat Vulnerability Index as one of the actions. Next slide, please. There are more resources that the report identifies and that the plan uses. Department of Health has an important website on that information too. And the next slide, please. And finally, I want to point to the CDC heat risk tool that is being implemented as part of the heat action plan to inform or communications or outreach or coordination when it comes to pre-onset activities to get information out to communities. But so that new tool is already being incorporated too and is available too. All right, so this is some of the stage setting. Next slide, please. The last one I already mentioned previously, the Urban Heat Island mapping. This is really to identify exposure and model it statewide on a high resolution, but also develop tools that allow on a project side to look at how different kinds of mitigation projects might change or help mitigate or exacerbate the Urban Heat Island effect. And so this, on this, we already had a deeper presentation in October last year, and we intend to engage with the Climate Justice Working Group as we start developing those maps and tools more deeply to help inform what is a good outcome and also come back on engagement more broadly on this. So this is more about the impacts, some of the tools available to understand vulnerabilities and impacts, and that summary report that overviews that. And the next slide, please. The second part is then the extreme heat action plan itself. That is a plan that details 49 state actions that state agencies are intent on taking to address those kinds of impacts, but also build community capacities. And that's what I'm going to spend another 5 to 10 minutes. I'm trying to keep it short on to give you a high level overview, and then we can like dive deeper with questions, but also we again welcome ongoing feedback on this plan. So next slide, please. I won't go too much into the genesis. You heard us talk about this plenty. Maybe we can jump to slide 36. Just to illustrate over the last 2.5 years, some of the resources we developed and to contextualize the heat action plan. We released in July 2022 an interim recommendation report that had already about 10 actions that the state started to implement as we developed the plan. Last June, the Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Services, which is essentially the emergency response, the FEMA equivalent of the state, released a heat-specific annex to the state's comprehensive emergency management plan. And that is really how do we mobilize existing state resources if there is an extreme heat emergency. The heat action plan, which we released this June, is intended to define state actions, so actions that state agencies are committed to and intend to take. It's an action plan, a plan for action to build additional capacity, be it in communities, be it through bringing programs underway, or by building and coordinating capacities that can in the future help inform local and state responses. But it is not a response plan. It's complementary to that heat annex we released in June 2023, and which is regularly updated through the Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Services. Next slide, please. The plan itself is organized, it's the centerpiece of 49 strategies and across 4 action tracks. Each of those are described in fair detail. They also identify lead and supporting agencies that are responsible for implementing those actions. And it identifies short and mid-range goals for each of the individual actions that we hope to achieve through them. In addition, it defines mission goal and principles that are intended to apply, inform, structure the implementation of all those 49 actions, but also are intended to be an orienting post for others that wish to take state extreme heat action. So for example, if we do Climate Smart Communities program about advancing extreme heat actions, then we hope that we can over time better support communities in taking actions that are aligned with key equity goals and principles, for example. The plan also describes how we intend on going about implementing those actions and describes a set of indicators we hope to track over time to help evaluate the plan and support ongoing updates of the plan. The plan is intended as a living document. So we are starting to implement this. As I mentioned, we are intending to give pre-summer preparedness summaries on what happened, where we are going, that will be published on the DEC website. And then we intend for regular updates to the plan itself based on the experiences, emergent gaps, feedback we receive from communities, and so on and so forth. Next slide, please. As you explore the plan on your own time, just an orientation of how this plan is organized. On the right side, you see the table of contents. The actions themselves are described in section 7, extreme heat adaptation actions. So here you see what's in the action, who's the lead, what are the goals, those kind of things. In addition, we have the implementation and evaluation section following that, and then those other components are described there before that. So that is how was the plan developed, what are the mission goals and principles that we seek to apply across those actions, but also a brief summary about what is the existing resources and extreme heat responses that this plan complements. So this is a high-level overview of how this looked like. For purposes of time, I'm gonna skip over a little bit the timeline of development. I'll give a high-level summary of that. Next slide, please. Just to underscore, we came to you as we started this process. We invited collaboration with a wide range of community partners and interested partners. We had monthly planning forums with about 200 participants over starting in November 2022 and to June 2023. This included community-based organizations, representatives from academia and local governments. And that resulted in identifying impacts, identifying needs, and starting to formulate and identify potential strategies from different contexts that could run into this plan. Next slide, please. We then went into regional workshops and communities, working with different community partners to learn more about what are local needs, what are local experiences, how do some of those solutions track against what are experiences across different contexts in the state. And all of this then went into a first draft, next slide, of the plan. We are really grateful to advisory panels, both from academia as well as from community-based organizations. Some members of the Climate Justice Working Group were generous in participating or other representatives of their organizations in participating in the process. And in January of this year, I believe, it was late January, I think, we were able to provide a first complete draft to those advisory panels who had about a month to review and give us comprehensive feedback, and then we incorporated that over the remainder of this first half of the year for the final plan. I think we were able to incorporate a lot of that feedback we received into this first plan for action that was released in June. And now as we move into implementation, we are really eager to receive ongoing feedback written in written form via email. This can be super formal. This can be a simple email to help us understand what did we miss, what is more needed, how are we doing over time, and we will make effort in meetings like this, for example, to also keep reminding people that we ongoing collect this feedback and want to track more. Next slide, please. I know we have 15 minutes towards the end. So in terms of actions that are in the plan, they're organized into 4 action tracks. I will give you a quick summary of some examples based on this slide. I have some slides where we can dive a little bit into more detail, but I want to make sure that we at least have 15 minutes to talk about this. So in track 1, this is actions that are about capacity building, but also additional research. And this includes, for example, targeted engagement with Indigenous nations, with youth that often are not as proactively engaged on designing solutions, identifying solutions and needs to do more of this kind of work, but it also involves supporting things like piloting resiliency hubs and community networks, funding local extreme action and adaptation plans, and doing research, for example, the green extreme heat cooling solutions challenge that NYSERDA just released to advance passive affordable cooling solutions. The second track is about, and we can stay on this slide, about community preparedness, enhancing communications, developing more tools to work with community partners, but also strengthening workers' protections. Department of Labor just released new extreme heat guidance and recommendations for how to keep employers safe on the workplace. But this also includes how can we coordinate better across agencies to reach the most vulnerable communities, including by partnering with trusted communicators in the communities. The third track is about building and infrastructure as well as educational areas. So this includes actions like funding facility upgrades, in educational settings to bring cooling there. It included making additional resources this summer right off the gate available to extend the cooling assistance through HEAP. Sadly, that is even with that extended resources already close this year. So we are also working with the Department of Health to expand coverage through the essential plan for covering ACs. or deploying accelerating electrification of bus fleets and prioritizing deployment in heat vulnerable disadvantaged communities. And I think there was a point made of working more with the air monitoring program. So I think Margaret and I are happy to talk more about with each other about that too, to make sure that this is tied up, because they are doing similar work. And are already talking about this. And finally, mainstreaming ecosystem-based adaptation. This includes from funding solutions to address tree inequities to training arborists, but also other important conservation workforce that are involved not only in planting, but also maintaining and developing training and apprenticeship programs that make those kind of career paths and better paying jobs in those career paths available, especially in disadvantaged communities. So that's some taster program. I know this was a lot in short time, trying to fit this in the final minutes. Maybe if we jump to slide 52, that's just to stay on, to keep it on the screen, where and how we got our feedback with a QR code and invite feedback. But I want to stop here to make sure that we have at least a little bit time to talk with each other about this today. And apologize for a lot of information that I dumped out there in a short order.
Slides are stalling a bit because I clicked on them pretty fast, but they should load. Eddie, I see your hand is up.
Thanks so much, Alana. And apologies, Leo. I think, Alana, I don't know if this is accurate or not. I don't recall seeing an agenda for today's call, which is why I thought most of it was going to be on the CAM project. So apologies to Leo and anyone else who's here on Extreme Heat who was hoping for more time. Again, if an agenda was included in the emails excuse me, I didn't see it. Going to this point, Leo, just quick point. The problem with living documents and accepting feedback on an ongoing basis is that feedback can be ignored. Feedback can be overlooked. Feedback can be, that's why we were insisting on a public comment period, because the presumption with a public comment period is that the agency is on the hook to actually have to respond to, and so we have no way of knowing which of our feedback is going to be incorporated or not. So, and it's even more troubling because originally in DEC's own promotional materials and webinars, you guys said you were going to have a public comment period, and then it didn't happen. So again, I don't think I need to kind of reiterate to this crowd why public comments are preferable to just casual feedback. It's just we don't do feedback for other regulatory schemes and plans, so it's just for us something that we thought was a big oversight. But having said that, to not belabor this, let me just ask two just quick follow-up questions, to Leo or anyone else. For all of this, is there any dedicated funding for the implementation of EHAP?
So there is not a one line item in SADA EPF that says here is X, Y, and Z amount of money to implement the plan as a whole. We did all of the actions we asked agencies to commit to the extent possible. So all of those actions were reviewed by all of the agencies and said, okay, we can do those actions. Obviously, if there is a pandemic next week, maybe resources have to shift, but under current circumstances. That being said, there's always opportunity to scale those actions. And I think there is a lot of intent in there, in the sense of, here's how we can move the needle, here's how we can better coordinate existing resources while working towards securing additional resources, be it through federal partners in concert with foundation partners, or by coordinating those resources through existing programs and scale as opportunities emerge. And we've seen some of that already happen, right? Like New York Swims is a good example where there's a significant investment. I think the 25 million trees initiative, we are working very closely with those efforts to including to prioritize urban heat vulnerable communities that are disproportionately exposed to extreme heat and other disadvantaged communities for that matter too. So the short answer is no, we don't have dedicated funding, but we sought to leverage part of the charge to coordinate existing resources and make them reach further, and in part also reprioritize towards extreme heat, and then work coordinated across those agencies to secure additional resources.
Thanks. I just have one last question. Who's monitoring the implementation of the suggested actions?
So we have in that section on implementation and evaluation, we identify certain indicators that we're looking at tracking. For example, net land cover change when it comes to extreme heat and urban heat islands and tree inequities. That's coming through our, we are working for the most part through our office on like a high level summary preparedness report each year. The baseline is each agency is responsible for implementing their actions, which is part of why it's described on who's responsible for leading. And then through our office, we are convening key staff of those agencies to help coordinate the implementation and then do those high-level pre-summer preparedness summaries on where we are at to post on our website, in addition to those indicators that we are seeking to track. Yes, DC Office of Climate Change. A lot of the work I will do, unless I'm told otherwise. Yeah, that's the plan. And then I would say for the indicators, we also identified where they exist. And so, for example, when it comes to things like spending measuring spending benefits towards disadvantaged communities, we are looking there toward the overall spending tracking and reporting that's done elsewhere for the CLCPA, so as to not duplicate things, right? So where there is information generated somewhere else, we'll look towards that, versus where there is new things we are interested in measuring, such as, I don't know, how many actions have been implemented. That's done by us. There might be an overly detailed response, but yeah.
Does anyone else have any questions for Leo and for our Office of Climate Change team?
I do, but I know better.
Well, we have 4 minutes left, Eddie.
I don't want to get kicked out of the working group either by DEC or my fellow working group members. So
You're not gonna get kicked.
I'll hold on to the last couple.
There's no method for that. But no, feel free to like send any questions that you have to our team. Like I said, if I had known that this was going to be long, I would have made this a longer meeting. So we would have had that sort of no. Or maybe split them up between two. That's okay. You know what? This goes on my list of lessons learned. Now we know sometimes these need to be 2 meetings. Sometimes in the interest of time, we just have 2 meetings. But that's fine. But thanks to, if there are no other questions on for our extreme heat action work, thanks so much, Leo. Thank you to folks from Air Resources. Don't want to keep people waiting. We are at, yes, Leo has put some information in the chat. We are at 4:27, so we have just a couple minutes left. So here's some information on the feedback form. So we'll talk about next steps quickly. Oops, sorry, I skipped over them. So we have a meeting scheduled for September 10th from 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock. I believe that is the time. I did ask folks, and if people still want to get back to me, to let me know if it's okay. So in the interest of time, I know Eddie, you just said no to a 3-hour meeting, but as we are looking to really dive deep into deliberations for the disadvantaged communities criteria, let me know if it's okay to extend a couple of these meetings. If this is something we want to have a deeper conversation about, we can definitely set up a quick conference call and discuss that offline. But definitely let me know. For folks who are attending and listening in on this, we are still accepting feedback on the disadvantaged communities criteria until today at 5 o'clock. So you have 30 minutes to get that in. I'm not going to be an insane stickler on that. So if it comes in at 5:01 or comes in at 7 o'clock, that's fine. We just want to make sure that we do have a deadline because we do have our folks on the technical team that do have to analyze that data, analyze your comments and put them in there so the climate justice working group can continue that. Yes. So I did embed the agenda into the email. I will make it way more obvious next time so you know. Sorry about that. I didn't want to put too many things into the already very long email that I sent you guys, but I will definitely make sure that I make that a lot easier for folks to identify in the future. So as I said, I'll be in touch soon. We have with reminders about our meeting on September 10th and of course the meeting on November 12th. Please let me know as soon as possible whether or not you guys are available to have those meetings extended. So we can try to get all that we need to get done before the end of the year. We only have one more. We have the September 10th meeting and the November 12th, and then we won't be meeting again until 2025. The goal is to try to have the criteria updated by the end of March of 2025 at the latest. So as close to our anniversary date as possible, simply so we can have that information available for first quarter. Again, just the goal is to make sure that we are having an opportunity to actually sit and deliberate on this information. Eddie, you look like you want to say something. Just pondering. Okay. Well, we are at 4:30. I know it's very close to the end of the day, and even though some of you probably do have other meetings that you're going to, so I'm going to let you go. Thank you for jumping on. As always, feel free to reach out to us with any questions. If you want to discuss either of these two presentations further, reach out and we can either answer questions or we can set something up and we can all chat again. Again, thanks everybody. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, please feel free to reach out to me and we will talk again soon. All right. Thank you, everyone.